very pleased to speak to you this morning about a topic that I've been wondering about. All those letters after my name there indicate that I'm a woman in tech. I have been for 30 years. So unlike Niamh, I didn't jump ship. I stuck to it. I've been studying engineering, working in engineering, or teaching engineering for a very long time. And in recent years, I've been thinking about how we do it and wondering about whether or not actually we need to transform how we do it. And before I lose all my friends in engineering, I better point out that actually engineering education is really good. We have an excellent system of professional accreditation. It's peer-reviewed, it's internationally benchmarked. It's great. There's no problem. Except that actually, when you've spent years working on something, refining it, building it through experience, building consensus, it can be very hard to get momentum behind a discussion around how you might need to change it. Because change is hard. Change means that for a short while, maybe you wouldn't do it as well as you've begun to be able to do it if you start trying to do it in a different way. Maybe you would lose something. And I understand that, but I firmly believe that there is a prize worth being brave for here. There are a number of facts, new realities, new insights, which mean that we have to look at how we're doing this. I particularly think of what I think of as the middle section of students when I talk about this, not the high flyers who top their class, but the bulk, 3/4 of engineering students who maybe stumble once or twice along the way and who go on to be the engineers of our world. I think there's huge increases in learning gain that we can achieve by changing how we do things. So I'm going to hop around a bit from one thing to the next. I'm going to make some sweeping generalities just to make my point, so I hope you'll forgive that. I'm also hoping that the game of joining the dots to create a picture is a fairly universal experience, because that's how I've structured my talk. I'm going to land on a number of dots, facts, insights, points, which I think we now need to start to connect in order to improve how we train our engineers. And the first of these is a very simple, well-established fact. We are going to need way more engineers and computer scientists than we currently have. I could wallpaper my house with the reports that talk about this. It's not an Irish issue, it's not a European issue, it's a global issue. And many of you might be aware of the explosion in technology in the financial sector, the fintech. Earlier, edutech was mentioned, but the same thing is happening in every sector that you can think of. It's either happening already or it's about to happen. And most of the technology needed for that explosion is already here. So we're going to lose jobs, certain types of jobs. There are going to be huge opportunities created, and most of those are going to relate to technology. Which brings me to my next dot. We are coming nowhere close to filling the numbers of graduates that we need to meet this demand. There's what the OECD call a field of study mismatch. Now, I can't imagine this group of Westmead students who just finished school last year and made the newspapers have ever heard of a field of study mismatch, but I thought I'd include them here today, if only to show how young they are when they're finishing school. They look a bit older 8 weeks later when they collect their results and they've got the makeup on and they've shed the uniform, but they are very young at 17 and 18 when they're picking what they're going to study at college. We're going to have to do something very radical to bridge this gap between the interest in STEM and the demand that we have to fulfill the ambitions and the promise that STEM offers us. I think the key to that lies in things like the Walton Club, but it also lies in the fact that a huge number of students leaving school have no idea what they want to do. And then they default in droves to programs in the arts, in humanities, in business. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that there isn't an equivalent drift in droves of students who have in their heads the conversation, I've no idea what I'm going to do. I know, I'll do a tech degree and see where that takes me. It just doesn't happen. And I think the key to change is in somehow making that part of the conversation. If you have a son or a daughter who doesn't know what they want to do, why aren't we challenging them and saying, study something in tech? It's where the future is, it's where the opportunity is. When you talk to a group like this, What often comes up is, well, what does an engineer do anyway? And in an attempt to get across the excitement and the importance of that, I find myself saying things like this. It brings across, the collective contribution of engineers. So all these statements are true. But if you actually meet an engineer and ask him or her, what do you do every day? You get this probably a collection of slightly different answers. It might start like this. Engineers operate in a huge variety of modalities of doing, of thinking, of interacting. And as these float across the screen, keep an eye out for the frequency with which you see words that relate to communicating, people, managing resources, dealing with ideas. So yes, there are calculations, there's data, but there's also learning, there's arguing, there's decision making. In essence, engineers actually are the focal point where they connect information with ideas, with the people who can help realize the solutions. You can categorize that type of activity, and engineers, we love to categorize, so I went looking for people who had done that. This is an example of how you might categorize it, which was proposed by Goldberg and Somerville, and I like it, because what they talk about is looking at the 6 minds of the engineer. I think there are at least 6 minds. The design mind is the one that was spoken about earlier. It's creative, it's expansive thinking, it's imaginative. There is nothing more creative, if you think about it, than being able to do what computer scientists can do with the raw materials of 1 and 0. It's incredible. Analytical thinking, on the other hand, is convergent thinking. Linguistic mind is all about the fact that engineers operate in and through language, whether it's written or spoken. The people mind is about using your emotional intelligence, your storytelling ability to connect with people and to influence them. The body mind is a peculiar one there, but we now know that actually physical presence, the body influences your ability to make decisions in an instinctive way, to influence people, to lead people. And the last one, Goldberg and Somerville called the mindful mind, but that's a bit woolly for me because I'm an engineer, so I've called it the mind. And what that's really talking about is the need to be deliberate in your approach to learning, to extract meaning and knowledge from your experience and from your failures, as was mentioned earlier. I think, and this is my point here, if we were to think more about engineering as this collection of attributes and skills, as well as being a job or a profession, we would approach the education of engineers in a very different way. I said I'd jump a bit, and I'm going to do that now. And I'm not going to linger too much on this, but I want to talk about the people who we entrust with educating our engineers, me and my ilk. Every year, about 50,000 students in Ireland leave school. About 15,000 of those have taken higher maths. And from that group, we draw the 5,000 or so who study engineering and technology-related subjects. From the best of those graduates, we take our doctoral candidates. And from the most competitive of those doctoral candidates, we find our faculty to teach the engineering schools. This is good. They are a highly filtered group. They're very analytical in their thinking. They make good researchers. I said I wasn't going to dwell on it, but when you highly filter something, you filter stuff out as well. The group of people who educate our engineers probably haven't had a huge amount of experience of failure, for example, and we heard earlier how important that can be in learning. So the culture of an engineering school is defined by the faculty members. If you don't have diversity in the faculty members, then you are losing something. Jump to the next dot. I'm going to summarize this very quickly by saying we're having to reimagine universities and what they're for. This is a random collection of logos. It's happening all over the world. We no longer sit as exclusive repositories of expert knowledge. We help create it still through the research that we're doing. But if you're a second-year or third-year engineering student and you're wondering how you would analyze the stresses in a pipe or build a new circuit or understand a term you've come across, it takes seconds to access a huge amount of content which will help you do that. In that context, you have to question any interaction at the university level between lecturer and student, which essentially does this, but slower. So there's a challenge for us there. It also, however, creates space, because if you don't have to spend time delivering content anymore, there's something you could do with that time. Which brings me to my next collection of dots, and these are just examples for a whole body of work outside of engineering, where we're building evidence for new insights that should be applied in engineering. So I'm picking a few. Some of you might be familiar with Carl Dueck's work. She has established that it's not so important what our IQ is, but what we believe about our IQ. If we believe it can be grown through hard work, we have a growth mindset. If we don't, we'll have a fixed mindset. If I bring you back to those 6 minds of the engineer, only a growth mindset is consistent with an engineer firing off all 6 minds. We don't talk about this in engineering education. We don't talk about presence. We don't talk about the connection between your physical standing, your physiology, and how that impacts on how you perform. We don't talk about what neuroscience has discovered around how we think and how we make decisions, when it's important to use analytical thinking, because if you rely on your intuition, you'll be wrong. Why it's important to build up habits of doing problems, because you're going to rely on that when you have to make an instinctive problem. These are the types of new insights that we ignore at our peril in terms of how we approach engineering, educating our engineers. And my last dot here is that actually the students are different. The students have always been different. They're different every year. We are about to welcome this September in the university the first of our Generation Z students, so those who were born from the year 2000 onwards. Defining how the students are different is difficult, and the first out of the traps, of course, are those who are involved in marketing. They say a lot about the millennials in particular. I'm not going to subscribe to some of the views, but what is very clear is that students of this age group access information and filter information at a speed that is incredible. They have no patience for information that's provided at in any slower rate than that. They believe they can multitask without losing effectiveness or energy. But they're also thought to be particularly optimistic and mindful of the future. I don't believe this generation is any more lazy than previous generations. I don't believe that the education system should change to every fashion of a new generation, but you certainly have to understand how a generation think and work in order to educate them. So in a short period of time, you can only surface a certain number of things. My key point here is that we need to start connecting the dots, the known realities, the new insights that we have from areas outside engineering, the new technologies, in order to change how we approach engineering education. If we do, we can provide engineers who are firing off all these 6 minds. We can provide enough of this type of engineer for the ambitions that we have in relation to what technology can develop. And really importantly, I think that we open up whole new possibilities to actually, finally, cross that last frontier of gender representation and increase the number of women engineers. Thank you.